Shane Stacks on the radio.
Oh, yeah. I love that.
Shall we play a game?
Why, yes. I believe we shall.
Oh, I got a live one here.
Getting geeky in Little Rock, it's Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. I'm your host, Shane Stacks. Thanks so much for tuning in, whether you're listening on the radio on Saturday at 1 p.m. in the Little Rock, Central Arkansas area on 101.1 FM, The Answer, or if you're listening via the live online stream at 101.1 FM, theanswer.com, or if you're listening after the fact by podcast or on Krypton Radio or on YouTube or one of the many ways the show goes out. I'm just glad to have you. So excited to have my guest today. This is somebody that I've been following and chatting with here and there on Twitter, loving his work. I think not only is he a great talent, but he's got a really amazing attitude. And I think especially these days when things are so divided ideologically, people are just arguing about everything. I think that his approach is super important. So he's a double or even triple. He's a triple plus threat in his and what he does. He works in several industries, but he's at least a double threat for me in that I love everything he does, and his personality and how he approaches dialogue, I think is very cool and very, very admirable and needed. But with no further ado, I want to introduce you to Bryan Edward Hill, who is a comic book writer, a screenwriter, and other things. I'll let him tell you a little bit more about that. But Bryan, thank you for coming on. Welcome so much to Shane Plays Geek Talk.
Oh, well, thanks for having me, man. This is great.
Yeah, so you are in L.A.
I am. I'm in downtown L.A.
So is it just like tumbleweeds, or what's going on out your window?
Well, the funny thing is, most of the time when you see like the densely populated images of downtown LA, those are people who come in and out for work, or people who are coming downtown from the west side to visit downtown.
Right. Now
that we're under lockdown, it's pretty much relegated to the residents of downtown, which is a much smaller fraction of people, right? So it's a little John Carpenter out there, and the streets are kind of vacant. It's a little surreal because now everyone is wearing their own version of PPE when they go outside, virtually everybody.
I looked like I was holding up a stagecoach when I went to the grocery store yesterday. So.
Well, I have a cloth mask that I wear, and then I have a balaclava that I wear over the cloth mask. And then if it's the daytime and I'm walking my dog, I also wear sunglasses. So I kind of look like Snake Eyes.
I love that. I love that very much. So I have to ask, what kind of dog does Bryan Edward Hill have?
Oh, he's a puggle. He's a cute little guy. Yeah. I've had a couple dogs. I had a Akita at first when I moved to LA, and then he passed.
I'm sorry.
And then I got this, we got a little small dog, a little lap dog. And he's great because he can sit next to me on my couch while I play video games.
That is great. Well, as long as that come up, what video games do you play? I know you were involved with adapting Just Cause 2, I think into a screenplay. So what kind of video games do you play?
Well, right now, I've been playing a lot of open world games because it lets me go outside.
Okay. Sure, why not? Yeah.
So like sometimes I'll just put on GTA 5 because it looks so much like Los Angeles, and I'll just walk around that game world, and let the mind kind of get fooled into thinking that you're out there, because I have a projector set up in my home office. So
nice.
It plays itself out in a big like 110-inch screen. So I've been playing that, Forza, the Need for Speed Heat, like driving games are fun now. And recently it's been a lot of Ghost Recon Breakpoint.
Well, okay. And that's just to work a little stress out, right? That catharsis.
It's meditative, especially open world games for me. I really just kind of live in the game world, let the mind wander, do some things. Like the pace of Ghost Recon Breakpoint, since it's a stealth-based game, is a little slower. And you can just kind of relax a little bit while you're shooting bad guys. I was playing Division 2 for a while, but frankly, the world of the Division 2 is too close to our world, and it was starting to bum me out.
Yeah. There's been a couple people lately, like, they were watching old episodes of something, and they're like, this is a little uncomfortably close to home. So
yeah, I mean, the whole the world of The Division takes place after a pandemic has essentially shattered society. And there was one level that I had to play where I had to go into, I think it was like a gymnasium or something that had been turned into a makeshift morgue.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and it was like hospital beds and body bags. And there was one empty hospital bed in the game world that had a stuffed animal on it and like pictures like it around. And I was like, you know what?
Yeah, that's a little close to home. Yeah, I mean, it really is.
Right now. A little too much right now.
Yeah, I mean, and it's I think maintaining a positive attitude right now and focusing on what you have as well as being wise and cautious about what's going on in the world is super important. But there are really huge challenges and horrible things happening right now too. So I'm trying to maintain a positive attitude, and I am maintaining a positive attitude. I'm focusing on what I have. I do believe we'll come through this on the other end. But yeah, that would be a very grim moment right now in a game, without a doubt. So
yeah, I mean, it's a credit to Ubisoft and the way they've realized that game world that it feels very accurate, but it was just a little dank. So I moved on from that and started off Breakpoint, because Breakpoint just released a new mode that lets you play really tactically. And I enjoy that. It's usually when I'm playing a game, my mind is going somewhere else.
Sure.
Like I'm thinking about stories or, just kind of like letting all my thoughts kind of wander. And I just spend a lot of time in these game worlds just to explore them and be able to leave without going anywhere.
Right. So, folks, Bryan, and we will get into this, but there's some fascinating discussion here. And as most people know if you're a longtime listener to the show, I let the discussion go where the discussion goes. I try not to keep it as a super formal interview, but just to let people know, Bryan is a screenwriter, a comic book writer, among other things. And then he's also, as you hear, a video gamer. So I've got to ask him, as a writer, as a creator, do you feel that, because you live in story and narrative structure and character motivations, you live in that as you're living, thinking about those things. So does that enhance or detract from your enjoyment of entertainment? Do you just spend, are you like Neo looking at the code, or can you back off a little bit and just enjoy it for what it is?
It comes and it goes, man. I find the hardest part isn't like slowing down my analytical mind, when I'm watching something, because that's easy. You can just kind of watch a thing and because I think when we watch a thing, we're going to have an experience. So, because we're planning to have that, it's easy to slow down that part. The difficult part for me is I get influenced by what I consume, right? So let's say I'm working on like superhero stuff, like Batman and the Outsiders, for instance. If I watch like an indie drama in the middle of writing one of those scripts, it'll take me off the frequency of what I was writing. Right. So I tend to like watch things and read things and experience things that are somewhat close to what I'm working on until I finish that project, and then I can get to other things. The same thing if I was working on like a indie drama screenplay, like I'm getting ready to start one now for a producer. Well, when I get into that, then I won't be watching as many big genre films and that kind of thing, because I work by immersion, and I like to kind of sink myself into the culture and the grammar of whatever I'm kind of doing. So I tend to kind of go over here for a little bit and play around with that, and then over here, maybe I'll make some music to, get me in the vibe for something. But it means I can't just ingest everything willy-nilly, because it'll just take my mind to a totally different place.
Right. Okay. Well, that makes total sense to me. So do you have, speaking of, you're talking about you have a new screenplay that you're gearing up to write, or maybe you've already started writing. Do you have any projects going on right now that you want to make sure to highlight or promote? I wanted to give you some time to do that.
Well, a lot of the screenwriting things I do, I can't talk about because it's part of the contract, right? So the way studios work, when they hire you to do a thing, they kind of want you to keep it under wraps until it comes together, because they just want it to be the splashiest thing possible. But what I can share is I wrote a film called Zone 414 that was shot in January. It's in post-production now, and it's starring Guy Pearce, Travis Fimmel, Matilda Lutz, and it's a sci-fi, sort of thriller. So that'll be on the way. And then I've got more stuff coming. Titans is still going. I'm a writer-producer on that show. So, anyone who follows me on Twitter at Bryan Edward Hill, that's Bryan with a Y. Why? Because we like you.
And I do recommend that.
There.
I do recommend that Twitter account. I talked over you, Brian. You were saying you can get your updates there. I apologize for that. But
it's all good.
Yeah, I totally recommend. You're one of the best Twitter accounts out there. So, I mean, I saw you today earlier legitimately asking somebody that was having a hard time if there was any way you could help. And I know that you mean it just based on, keeping up with you online for a couple of years now. So speaking of, it's Zone 414, right? Is that the, okay. I saw that on IMDb, on your IMDb page, and I saw that you've got a producer credit on that as well. So you're a writer, producer. And so that was your concept, or what exactly, like, what was did you come up with the whole Zone 414 thing, or did somebody ask you to do the screenplay, or how did that work?
Well, in that case, that was my original concept, and I wrote the screenplay based on an idea that I had. Sometimes, so screenwriting, for those who are interested in the profession, can sort of take one of two forms. One form of your employment is a studio wants to get a story, and they interview writers to find a writer to write that story for them. Included in that is sometimes a studio wants you to rewrite something that they've already commissioned, and the draft doesn't fit their needs for one reason or another, and they're looking for new writers. And so a lot of your work is going to be that. The other side of your work are projects that you just do yourself. Right. It means you're not getting paid to write them, but you write them because you see them in your head, and then you have to find people that want to make the movie. In this case, this was a movie that I had intended to make myself when I wrote it.
Ah, okay.
And then I got busy. And good busy, but still busy. So it was just sitting there, languishing. And a music director friend of mine, Andrew Baird, he had directed a video for The Weeknd, and I'm a huge fan of The Weeknd, and so I became familiar with his work from that. And Andrew's a funny, crazy Irish guy, and he just really responded to the script. So the producing credit really is, I didn't charge them my normal rate for the script, because it was going to be an under $5 million movie.
Okay.
So I took a pay cut and instead took a producing credit and was a little involved at the periphery with some of the creative production issues. But they shot in Belfast and I stayed here in Los Angeles. So I really wasn't there day to day. And the reason I'm making a distinction is I don't want to insult people who actually are day-to-day producers on a movie, right? That's a hard job and it requires a lot of a person. This was a case where I got a producing credit and I did a little bit of this. I had some input with casting and talked to some actors and all of that. But that was really Andrew and his team in Belfast that did most of the producing there on that one.
So was that hard for you to be in LA while that was going on in Ireland with it being sort of your baby? Or did you just, what was that like?
Not really, man. Like, I've also been working in TV for 4 years and working in comics for 10 years. And, I've been, selling screenplays for like the past, 10 as well. You sort of just realize that unless you're making it yourself, it's just not going to be what you saw in your head. Right. Mm-hmm. And you have to let that go. And Andrew, being a friend of mine who has a very different sensibility than I do, and I didn't want to hamper his creative vision. So I told him, look, you have to make the movie that makes sense for you, and if you're making choices I wouldn't make and all of that, that's irrelevant because you have to make this movie. You're going to get the directing credit. You're going to be tip of the spear on that. So you make the movie that you want to make. And so I made some changes to the script for him and try to be as accommodating as I can through the process. And yeah, sometimes you'll see something and you're like, I wouldn't do that way. I wouldn't do that way. And then sometimes you'll see something and be like, that's an interesting way to approach that. I hadn't thought of that, right?
Right.
So I kind of let go of the ego and enjoy the experience. I mean, it's so surreal to see people performing something that you wrote, in your first apartment in LA like 5 years ago, right? It's kind of crazy because they're kind of breathing life into these people that you wrote down on paper. So I just tend to enjoy those aspects of it, and I just don't get wrapped up in it. Because I'm also a filmmaker, I think it's easier for me to let go, ironically, right? Because if I wasn't a filmmaker, maybe I would feel like I have to find a director that's going to do exactly what I want to do because that's the only way. But I feel like I'm going to make a movie at some point, relatively soon, probably, right? And when I'm in that chair, I'll make the choices and it'll be what I want it to be. So it's easier for me to let go of things because I know I have a place where I can get my own voice out to the people. And as a fellow filmmaker, I want to give other filmmakers the space that I would want to approach material. So I really just relegate myself to a support role. Actors have questions, I'll answer them. Like I had a lot of conversations with Guy Pearce, who's a lovely man. He's just great. And I talked to him. I talked to Travis Fimmel, Matilda Lutz, and they're all like really great talents. And you just try to support the efforts of the people that are boots on the ground making the thing, and let go of your expectations and just see what bubbles up.
So when you say it's not, I mean, it's a multi-million-dollar budget movie, but it's not like a blockbuster budget. Is this something that's going to get a wide release, or how can we expect, Zone 1-4 to come out? Like,
I don't know. I mean, you'll definitely be able to see it streaming in places like Netflix and Amazon. I don't know if we're going to do a theatrical or not. I mean, that's stuff that's above my pay grade, frankly.
Gotcha.
There's so many moving parts when it comes to making a theatrical presentation of a film. It isn't just quality of film. It's also the willingness to spend the money on marketing. And, I think we have a distribution entity in place, like a studio. I don't want to say which one because I'm not certain, but it's going to be up to the studio whether or not, they have the liquidity to put a big marketing campaign behind a movie. And because this is kind of an avant-garde, riskier sort of movie. I mean, it's a sci-fi thriller, but it was never intended to be a blockbuster. I mean, I was going to make this as kind of a weird Soderberghian, kind of strange Kubrickian almost thing, right? So it's not, I think, built to be the most commercial thing in the world, and it might do well kind of having either limited release or direct to streaming releases, like similar to movies like Mandy, that Nicolas Cage film.
Yeah, that is getting so much crazy word of mouth. I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard
it's nuts. It's so good. It's so good. Like that filmmaker Panos Cosmatos, I love his work. And my friend Aaron Ahn co-wrote the screenplay with Panos, and I think it's a really cool movie. I'm not saying the Zone 414 is nearly as good as Mandy. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think that the audience for avant-garde science fiction might be more streaming than theatrical, which is just the reality of the business we live in.
Well, and streaming these days is not second rate or anything. I mean, you got not Coppola, The Irishman went to Netflix first. I cannot believe I'm forgetting the name of that director. He's only one of the biggest directors.
Martin Scorsese.
Scorsese, yeah. Or he's only the next Martin Scorsese, as they said in Singles. I don't know if you ever saw that movie or not, but
sure.
He's only the next Martin Scorsese. Yeah, I mean, that went straight to Netflix. So, and I think that when we come through the other side, and again, people, I absolutely 100% believe, and it's not just willful thinking or wishful thinking. I firmly believe we're going to come through the other side of this pandemic, and there's going to be some changes in behavior because people have been forced to stay home and experience life differently. And I think streaming services are going to have even more, respect after this as primary sources of entertainment, and not just we'll stick it on there second.
Well, when it comes to entertainment, technology has always played a part in the evolution of entertainment and its position and relationship culturally to the audience, right? So when I was a kid, I remember the first days of Betamax. And for those listening who have no idea what I'm talking about. Yeah, I do
too. My dad had a Betamax.
It was progenitor to VHS, right? It was like, you go to a video store, you rent a thing, whatever. And that was my experience. Films were in theaters for longer periods of time. There were less films in theaters. So primarily you went theatrical. But, if you're a young person growing up now and, in the age of smartphones and everything else, look at services like Quibi that just started. So people's relationship to media has changed. I mean, no one could have predicted 20 years ago that people would be podcasting and doing radio shows, all across the world, right? Just broadcasting to people. Look at comics with, digital comics and the advent of that. I think as slate devices become cheaper and more people have access to those devices, you're going to see a proliferation of people, who would rather just have their content that way. I tell you what, the convenience of having 1,000 books on my iPad without having a shelf in my home is nice, So I think for artists of really any medium, and I would consider you an artist. I mean, what we're all doing is creative. We have to be fluid, and we have to respond to the waves of culture, right? And if you're so dedicated to a one format or another one, you're going to find yourself on the path to extinction, I think. And so for people older than me and people that come from a certain cultural worldview that might look at direct to streaming in a certain way, I can promise you that audiences don't.
A lot of people. There's people. It's gonna come up. We're getting soon to where the generation that becomes teenagers has always had like Netflix. You know what I mean?
So they're used to just having media
there
instantly. When I was a kid, take a movie, The Killer by John Woo. Right, John Woo was one of my favorite filmmakers growing up. It's an action filmmaker from Hong Kong. Loved his movies.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And they were impossible to find because they weren't on cable. And not many places had the videotape, right? Like Blockbuster didn't carry weird Hong Kong action films.
Yeah, you had to go to some specialty store, in some weird place downtown.
Some mom and pop store where someone there had a passion for filmmaking and strange films, and you get in a waiting list, and then they would call you when the film came in, and you would rush over there. That was my whole experience of entertainment. These kids now, they can just Google and get it, whatever it is,
instantly.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And they're used to things being fuzzy until the connection gets solid and then it gets better. And, so the things that might irritate people who never grew up with it, right? The smallness of the screens and, watching with all these distractions, that's just the experience that they're used to having. And, you have to respond to where people are and behavior instead of trying to change behavior. I think that's one of the things that that technology and creativity does best is they respond to where people are rather than trying to force people back to a thing that they like.
It's kind of a combination of meeting people where they currently are and discerning where they want to be, and they may not even realize it yet. That's one of the things that Steve Jobs was very good at.
Oh, absolutely. I was just going to bring up Steve Jobs. He was very good at seeing okay, I see what experience people are looking for, so I can make a product that seems strange now, but will fit really well into how people want to experience their technology. And it takes a kind of a touch of genius, more than a touch, really, to be able to see that and know I think this is where we're going. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to make this. I think instead of coming up with a better way to distribute CDs, maybe we just get rid of them.
Yeah, let's get rid of CDs and get them straight. Yeah, I mean, I remember when when Apple, I'm sure he drove the decision, said we're not going to have any disk drives in our laptops anymore.
Right.
Or,
and we all got used to it.
Yeah, people were like, "What? You can what?" And then next thing, and then they this is getting more technical than most people probably care about, but he said no more Flash. Safari's not going to support Flash, and iPhones aren't going to support Flash, and people really freaked out because at the time a lot of websites were being run on Flash. But he's like, nope, it takes forever to load. It's a security concern. And then it drove all this other HTML5 and CSS that now is delivering even a richer experience. But anyway, boy, we're on a tangent. So
yeah, sorry.
No, I love it.
It's like the tech hour.
Yeah. I'm going to reel us back just a little bit only because there's so much stuff I want to cover with you. We're coming up on a break here in a little bit. And after the break, we'll focus more on your comic book work, sure, which is, one of the main reasons I wanted to reach out to you. But I did want to give you a chance to express your love for Miami Vice. What is it about Miami Vice you love so much, and when did you first get into Miami Vice? Because you love you some Miami Vice.
I do. I really do. Well, Miami Vice to me is the best combination of fashion culture, the American Western ethic, It's sexy, it's thrilling. And when I was a kid growing up in Missouri, like I would watch the reruns and it just seemed like a window into the coolest thing ever that I would never get to experience. And then as I grew older, I just started to relate to the nature of the characters there. And I think, to me, it just speaks to the difficulty in trying to do the right thing, and Crockett and Tubbs are just two guys that are trying to, get the bad guys and make a world a better place, but they suffer a lot of defeats and Pyrrhic victories there, and they wrestle through those things. I think when you combine that with my love of like that lonely 80s pop culture aesthetic, then it just all comes together. And I tell you what, if anyone doesn't understand, where that love of Miami Vice comes from, and you don't even have to go to Miami to do it, you can be in LA, just find a Sunset Drive and put on some Phil Collins and you'll be right in the pocket.
Yeah, that classic, when you've got the car going down the highway and, it's Phil Collins is playing, it really captures that. And, speaking of how important like the music and the imagery is, I was watching, I think it was on Netflix, and it was a series on the 90s. And one of the episodes, no, on the 80s, on the 80s, and one of the episodes was the TV of the 80s. And, the people that, I'm sure this isn't any surprise to you, but for the listeners, the reason that Miami Vice just had splashed onto the scene and grabbed people's attention is because the creators were like, MTV's the big thing right now. I want to make a good show that has the sensibility of MTV. That the energetic parts of MTV, the color, the dynamism. And so that's what they did, with other elements in there too. So it's very purposefully in your face, not in your face in a rude way, but in your face in like, this is very cool. Look what we're doing way.
Well, I think about that about other things as well. Like, I'm always interested in how we can incorporate music culture into film and television, right? Like there's kind of an avant-garde quality and style to music, whether it's, rock, indie rock, electronica, hip hop, R&B, trap, whatever you want to, there's a grammar to it, and millions of people are experiencing this, but that energy doesn't oftentimes show up in our other media. So I'm always trying to figure out a way to work that in and sort of do the same thing. And Michael Mann, one of the creators of Miami Vice, was Michael Mann and Anthony Yerkovich. That's one of Mann's greatest qualities, is his ability to kind of harness other aspects of popular culture, fashion, music, modern art, whatever, and then build narrative that takes some of that energy and puts that in there and dramatizes worlds with that energy kind of replete in how they're being presented. And I think it's really, really cool.
It was. I mean, and so that leads me to my next thing. And Miami Vice, I think, is a good thing to talk about for people who are creators or want to be creators, because there's a lot you can deconstruct and look at there. So how do you feel that the movie, was it 2005, 2000, whenever that came out, how well do you feel that did at bringing, what Miami Vice is, in outside of its, zeitgeist and into a new zeitgeist? How well do you think they did?
Well, it's really interesting, man. Whenever creators return to something that they did years ago, it's very difficult for them to recreate what they did because they're in a very different place. I love the movie because it's very different. To me, I read the movie as a storyteller who is not disinterested in that same experience, but it's a story that's really about futility in a way. It's a story about, kind of the hamster wheel of good and bad, crime and cop. And it doesn't really invest itself into the action thriller aspects as much as the character study aspects. And that I really appreciated. To me, it felt like a filmmaker who had some wisdom revisiting a world that he had created before. And it got out of the sort of simple paladin ethics of the television show and got into more complicated territory. Crockett has that that little monologue he gives on the beach where, and he's like, like the time runs out, the odds catch up, probability is like gravity, and you cannot escape from gravity.
The odds will eventually catch up. Yeah, when he's
and so like to me, I mean, always reading things. Going back to your first question, I do think about what is a filmmaker trying to tell me. What is a writer telling me, right? And if you look at like Heat, Collateral, Miami Vice, I think these are movies that have the moments of thrills and action in them, but they're also philosophical, and they're a lot about the emptiness left over after a violent resolution. What and all of Michael Mann's work is essentially about the same thing. It's usually about a character or characters that have to decide if they're going to uphold their own ethics in a world that doesn't agree with those ethics at the risk of being destroyed by it, or are they going to disavow their own ethics in order to get along with the world? And usually the man protagonist sticks to their guns, literally and symbolically, and deals with the repercussions of that. And maybe because I still have a little bit of inner cowboy outlaw in me, I respond to that pretty well.
Right. Yeah. I'm gonna meet the world on my own terms. No matter the outcome. Well, I'll tell you, I watched the Miami Vice movie within the past month or two, and mainly because you post about it on occasion. It had kind of dropped off my radar, and then I saw it pop up, and I was like, "Oh, I'll check it out." Great movie, much better than the average action movie. It's not just your average buddy cop movie that follows a formula.
Right. Although I love those too. I do love me some Bad Boys. So,
those are fun, but for Miami Vice, I would have been disappointed if they turned that into, just another buddy cop movie with a couple of yucks in it. So, because Miami Vice, has always had its own thing. I'll tell you, there were two things about the movie that really struck me that I liked a lot. One, I absolutely love the part where they just jump in the speedboat and go to Cuba to have dinner. I love that.
That's such a flex move.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Listen, if I had, 4 hours with Gong Li, I would do the best I could.
Yeah. He's like, so they go to Cuba. They just go straight to Cuba. And the other thing that really struck me was how the cinematographer, whoever came up with this, how they did the gunfights, because they had impact and they had punch and they had energy, but it felt like it was a documentary. I mean, it felt very realistic how they did the gunfights. I was very impressed with that.
Well, it's people are so fluent when it comes to cinematic grammar. They don't even know that they're so fluent, right? Because we watch so many things, and it's very difficult to get an audience to feel surprised, and the use of digital photography, documentary style within fiction sort of helps trick the mind, right? Like your mind subconsciously reads those images in a different way than it would read something that looks obviously like fiction, and it can feel more real,
right?
And I think it's effective that way.
It definitely did feel more real. It was, I was like, anybody could die at any moment in this gunfight. It felt gritty. Yeah. It felt like, it was a different style, but it's like the beginning of Saving Private Ryan, where it felt like you were right there. Like anybody could die at any moment, now, like I said, it was a different technique that they used in Miami Vice, but I was very impressed with it. I got one more thing I want to talk about with you before we get to break. And then when we get back, we'll talk about your comics work, which is how I came to know you, was through your comics. I wanted to just publicly applaud you, and not in a fanboy, I'm trying to blow smoke, but I'm in a genuine human to human way for your approach to dialogue online. It's important and it's needed. I have never, even when I can tell that you're obviously upset about something, I've never seen you tear into anybody or just blast something off just to feel better for yelling and diminish somebody else. Even when people have diametrically opposed opinions to you, you try to dialogue with them. And I do, and I really appreciate that, because and we need more of that. because things have gotten so divided in the past few years where everybody is just running on anger and sound bites, and there's no nuance, there's no substance, there's no seeing other people as human beings. Like God has done a lot in my life, but one of the main things he's done is he opened my eyes to other people are not extras in my movie, right? Mm-hmm. They're universes, they're entire universes unto themselves, just like I am. So when you dialogue with people like that, that's very meaningful and touching to me. And I want to recommend people follow your Twitter so that they can see what I'm talking about. And we need more of that. There's a maturity and an empathy there that is sorely lacking. There are a few people out there that demonstrate it, and you're one of them. And I just really appreciate it. So like I even, I'll see you tweet sometimes and I'll be like, you know what? I think Bryan and I might disagree on that topic, but if we talked about it, there would be respect. So I just want to, I don't know if other people tell you that, but I want to tell you that. I think it's very important, and I appreciate you having that approach.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate that. Just real quickly, all I'll say about that is, look, we're going to disagree. People disagree, right? And disagreement is good because disagreement leads to revelation, right? If everyone thought the same way, then we wouldn't be able to solve problems. But the problem we run into is when we demonize a person because they think a different way than we do about a thing. And everyone is educated by what they've learned, academically, and also what they've learned by just living their lives. And truth is different for different people, right? So it's important, I think, to have these dialogues, without it just turning into insults and all of that, because we need to trade ideas with one another to find solutions, right? Like, and and I'm not speaking like directly politically, but we need both the right wing and the left wing because they complement each other, right? Like we need the yin and the yang,
Right.
And
I
without
100%
that,
agree with that.
There's no balance. You need balance, because any one point of view that just runs away with everything is going to be somewhat blind to the effect of what they're doing, And so when it comes to online stuff, I don't know what someone's going through, man. The worst thing in the world would be for me to berate somebody that I haven't even met in person because they said something that I disagreed with. And they're already having a miserable day and I made their day worse.
Right.
Right. I never want to make someone's day worse. So even when I might criticize a thing or an institution or something, and someone might have a different point of view, and they articulate it, even if they articulate it in a somewhat rude way, I'm not going to feed that rudeness back. I'm going to try to engage and try to turn it into a dialogue. And 90% of the time, it gets there. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people just want to be like cantankerous and, they just go away.
Some people are just looking for a fight no matter what.
And when you don't fight, they just go away because they're like, well, he's not going to play my game. But most of the time, people are like, he's having a blue check mark is actually talking to me in like a normal way. Right.
Yeah. Not dismissive or what are you doing down? What are you doing down there, plebe kind of thing?
Right. So they come off of their thing and like, wait a minute, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were having to have a real conversation. Well, the reason I feel like this is this, and then we get into nuance. So yeah, but thank you for saying that. I'm not special. I just, I grew up in Missouri, bro. And when you grow up in Missouri, you got to get along with people that are different. That's one of those states. It's kind of a purplish state that leans red some places, leans blue other places, So like you're going to know people that are just different. Mm-hmm. And you're just going to have to figure out common denominators. And that has a lot to do with it. I think if I grew up in a place that was, solidly one thing or another thing, I might be a different person. But because I had to grow up and find commonality, I think it just stuck with me.
Right. Well, that's fair, man. I appreciate it. Very much. Like I said, it's other people are real people. They're not just, some cardboard cutout, they're, and like you said, I think that's another important point. You don't know what's going on in their life right now. You don't know what's happened to them today. Why are they venting? Why are they so upset? Why are they so dismissive? So anyway, and, sometimes I think of it like, You know, the little toy where it's a bunch of metal balls hanging on strings and they click clack back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they won't keep click clacking if you stop the clacking on one side, right? If you don't push back, you know, you can stop that swing and that back and forth of all the yeah. And so, you know, if you just kind of disrupt the rhythm there. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get us to a break.
Cool.
And when we come back, we're going to be talking about your comic books, which again is how I came into the world of Bryan Edward Hill, although you're a screenwriter and, you know, involved with movie making and you way back in the day, you were a boom operator, for goodness sake. So I went through your, so, but I'm going to focus on comics when we come back. And again, your Twitter is Bryan Edward Hill, correct?
Yep. It's just my name.
Yeah.
You know, I've had it for a long time and didn't want to think about a cute nickname. So I was just like, I'll just put my name out there.
Well, I think I recommend everybody follow that Twitter account for multiple reasons. So anyway, when we come back, we'll be talking more with Bryan Edward Hill on Shane Plays Geek Talk.
Comic book lovers, visit thewildstars.com today. From the mind of author and comic book industry expert Michael Tierney, it's not just a comic book, it's a comic book novel. The Wild Stars is sci-fi and so much more. Learn the explanations behind UFOs and space gods. This isn't the Twilight Zone. This is the region of the Milky Way galaxy known as the Wild Stars. We guarantee you've never read anything like it. The complete comic book novel took 20 years to tell, with one reviewer noting, the story of the Wild Stars stretches ambitiously across space and time, from small-town murders to the destruction of planets, with every event given multiple layers of meaning. If you haven't read The Wild Stars, you're missing out. Visit thewildstars.com today.
Are you a fan of thrilling adventure, daring suspense, and just a touch of romance? Cursova has you covered. Since 2016, Cursova has been publishing the very best in contemporary fantasy and science fiction, retro pulp, and for you D&D gamers, Appendix N style fiction. Based in Little Rock, you can pick up their flagship magazine locally or at Michael Tierney's The Comic Book Store on Treasure Hill Road or Collector's Edition on JFK in North Little Rock. Swing by one of Michael's stores and pick up an issue or find them on Amazon. CIRSOVA, doesn't start with a K, it starts with a C. CIRSOVA, Cursova Magazine. Check them out today. You want to go ahead and throw out some love to Game Goblins. Some goblins are your friends. Game Goblins is Central Arkansas's premier retailer of Magic the Gathering, Warhammer 40K, board games, card games, RPGs, miniatures, and hobby accessories. Call Game Goblins at 501-224-GAME or visit them online at GameGoblins.com. That's 501-224-GAME or GameGoblins.com. Conveniently located 1121 South Bowman, right on the corner of Bowman and Canis in West Little Rock, and staffed by friendly employees, Game Goblins has expanded their store size, and there's plenty of room for exciting inventory and tables for play space. You'll like that space because Game Goblins has gaming events every day of the week. For all of your gaming needs, I heartily recommend Game Goblins. Make sure to check out their customer loyalty program that rewards you based on your actual purchases. Game Goblins earns your business and keeps it. First-time customers, mention Shane Plays and receive $10 off your purchase of $50 or more. Tell them Shane Plays sent you. And folks, if you do visit any of my sponsors, please tell them that you hear about them on the show. That helps them know that their advertising money and the relationship we've built is time and money well spent.
Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/Shane Plays.
All right, and we're back on Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. I'm your host, Shane Stacks. I'm joined by multi-talented writer, creator, movie creator Bryan Edward Hill, who is I've just been following for a couple of years, and I'm just so excited to have the opportunity to talk to, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to introduce him to my listeners. I can't recommend Bryan enough. not only for the quality of his writing and creating, but also he's just, as we were talking about before the break, his approach to dialoguing and engaging with people, I think is very admirable. But be that as it may, we've only got a few minutes left here. He's about to have to go. He shared something offline that's just so cool. He's living a cool life, in my opinion. So he's only got a few minutes left. So I want to get into his comic books. Now, Bryan, I think the way I came into reading you was the Wildstorm spinoff. What was that? Michael Cray.
Michael Cray. Yep.
Where you had a wonderful run in the Wildstorm universe with alternate takes on major DC characters. That was a heck of a lot of fun. And that just kind of grabbed me. And then I started reading, your run in Detective Comics, where you kind of set up Batman and the Outsiders. I'm reading Fallen Angels. Killmonger was amazing. You did that 5-issue series on Killmonger for Marvel. You've got, you're doing Angel, you're doing, Batman and the Outsiders. You've got some great, let me put it this way. You did American Carnage, which was that, if any comic book was pre-written to be a Netflix TV show, that one is. So I definitely hope that gets picked up. That was a really, really cool series. I put it this way. You're one of the few writers or artists or whatever, or creators in the comic book industry. If your name's on it, I pick it up sight unseen.
Oh, I appreciate that.
I mean,
Thank you so much.
I pick up Cyberforce. I mean, if your name's on it, I pick it up. So, and not everybody, makes that list. So, was there any comics you're currently working on right now that I didn't mention?
No, I think you got everything. I have another original project that's coming soon. I can't really announce it yet. We're one issue in, but that'll be on the way. And I work in comics a little sporadically. Like I've been doing Batman and the Outsiders for a bit, but I think my more natural home is in the miniseries space, mainly because my schedule is bananas. And I'm grateful to have all the work that I have and to have a career that's evolving the way it is, but it just puts my schedule at a premium. And I never want to feel like someone is wasting their money. Like my main concern when I'm writing anything is this book better than a sandwich? Because it costs a sandwich.
The sandwich meter, the sandwich scale
sandwich meter, man.
Of comic book quality. Okay, I'm down.
That joint is going to cost a sandwich, right?
Yeah.
And when you write comics, you get a bunch of free comics. Like the company sends you, boxes of books and all that. It's very easy to forget how much it costs to buy a comic book because you stop buying comic books, right? Like, creators are sending you PDFs of their material and all of that. Well, I'm really cognizant of the fact that people are spending money and time on my work. And I never want an issue to not be worth the cover price, and even when I do something that's like somewhat controversial, like Fallen Angels, for instance, which struck people the wrong way, even when it struck people the wrong way, they didn't think it was dumb. They just didn't like the way I did it. Right. Like, so you can never keep, you're always going to get criticism, but I never want the criticism to be, well, he didn't think about this, this isn't thoughtful. It's fine if, you read my work and you're like, I just don't, I don't like this approach, and that's totally cool. That's going to happen. I'm not always going to be creating in a way that's going to speak to everybody, but I think for the most part, people know that my work is always thoughtful and it's always got a lot of intention behind it, and they can see the effort that I'm putting in to the storytelling. So even when it doesn't strike them in the best way, they're like, well, he's still a good writer. Like, he's still trying to do a thing. I just didn't dig this one, but I like this other thing he did, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then, like, American Carnage is a great example. I thought that book was going to create a ton of problems for me that I was just expecting to get. But you know what? I got very little. And what really pleasantly surprised me was for a book that could easily be turned into a political football, it didn't really. People from both sides of the aisle, always like kind of read it and responded positively to it and dialogued with me about it. And I was really glad to go through that experience.
Well, and my take on that, I mean, other people can speak for themselves. You told a racially, ideologically, politically charged story, but it was nuanced and everybody was represented. And even the people who were scumbags weren't one dimensional. So
well, that's really important to me,
right.
Shane. Like,
Yeah.
you know, when I first talked to DC Comics about that book, I told them, I don't want this to be a soapbox. I don't want anyone to read this book knowing what I think. I want them to read the book and get a story. And
Right.
I'm a storyteller. I'm not a politician, you know. I'm not a lecturer. I'm a
Right.
storyteller. So I tell stories. And I trust the minds of readers to make up their own mind about how they feel. I don't need to tell you how to think. That's not my job. My job is to tell a story. You can figure out how you think about it, right? And so I try to always respect the audience, you know. And I don't read things that pontificate, even if they pontificate points of view I agree with.
Right. No,
You know?
I get, yeah, right. Because you're there to be entertained.
It's just not enjoyable for me, like, because I do believe that stories can change minds, but I think you run into a very dangerous place when your intention is to change a mind, right?
Well, right. And that's a lot of my issue with a lot of current entertainment, not even comic books, just entertainment in general. It's not that points that creators are trying to make aren't important. It's that I'm spending time or money or whatever on your creation to be entertained. I'm not here to be lectured to, right? So I think a lot of people, when people say, hey, I don't want to read this or I don't want to watch this because it's so obviously a sermon on something. It's not that I'm saying that your sermon's not important. I'm saying that I'm trying to get away from the real world for a few minutes, you know, and that's my take on it.
Yeah, and I try to be very clear in the presentation of my work. You know, even on Twitter, you know, I would tell people like, this book deals with these things, but Batman doesn't, right? But Angel won't, right? So, you know, I'm letting people know, like, hey, if you like Michael Mann, Martin Scorsese, you know, gritty crime thrillers that are challenging, then yeah, American Carnage might be your thing. If you don't want to deal with all of that, then read Batman and the Outsiders, because that's a fantasy action story with, you know, I think good characterization, right? So, and audiences are smart, man. Like, they know, like, and they respect that, right? Like, when it's, I've never had a tremendous amount of difficulty with the current kind of back and forth cultural war going on in comics. One, because I don't feed into it. I try to treat everybody with respect, and generally I get respect back. Two, I don't see the point in exacerbating conflict.
Right. What does it help? What's the, there's no percentage in it. All you do is,
doesn't help.
All you do is thump your chest to make yourself feel good for a second. But
and I think it's my responsibility to be an ambassador to my point of view. And if I was berating people or, you know, lecturing people or demonizing specific people in my work, I am a poor ambassador to my point of view.
Well, right. And it's not even just that. You don't dismiss people. There's a lot of people out there that don't engage and argue. They just dismiss them. Like, well, you're not writing the book. You don't know what you're talking about. Just go away, you know? And, you know, you don't do that. So, but yeah, I think that American Carnage, I think anybody from any background can read it. I mean, I'm just a regular suburban, you know, white guy. And I found a lot in there that not only was engaging and entertaining, but there was some food for thought in there too.
Well, you know, it's an adult audience's book. It's a mature reader's book for sure. And, you know, sometimes being a writer is like being a bartender, right? Like, you know, you want a Coca-Cola, then I'll pour it over ice and it'll taste good. If you want a whiskey, you know, I got a whiskey for you too, right? Like, it's sometimes you want a stiff drink of a book. And then sometimes you're like, you know what, man, I had a bad day at work. My boss was difficult. I just want to, you know, go into the world of Batman. Yeah, I
want to watch Batman break somebody's nose.
So what I try to do is while I always want my work to have depth, meaning, I always try to know kind of, you know, who's my audience really, right? And think about when I come to that stuff. Like, there are times when I want to watch Academy Award winning movies. And then there are times when I just want to watch Bad Boys.
No, I get you.
I just want to watch Mike Lowry, and I need that right now, right? So, because my interests, I think, go across the board, I'm hopefully able to create things, with that space. And like something like Killmonger, it's the character always decides the tone, right? So, Eric as a character is a certain thing. Like Angel means I have to bring horror into that book, and there's a lot of horror in Angel because that's the world of Angel, but there's also some comedy there and all that. So, I enjoy kind of working in a variety of voices and ways, and I try to be as invisible as I can in the work, so you don't feel like, oh, I can hear Bryan. You feel like, oh, these characters talking.
I think that's another strength of yours, because I've read a lot of your books across different genres, and even books that are in the same genre but have a different, mission or whatever. And I always feel like I'm reading a unique book, that reflects those characters. So, and like Killmonger, I thought the Black Panther movie did a fantastic job of making Eric Killmonger, somebody who, even though I didn't like what he was doing, I kind of understood where he's coming from. Like he, and your series did the same thing. I may not have agreed with him. I may not have liked everything he was doing, but I understood why he was doing what he was doing. So, and I thought that was a really strong feat of writing to take that aspect from the movie and, also can, do it in a comic book. Cause sometimes it's hard, like in a movie, they're different mediums. So the fact that you were able to make Eric Killmonger, who's like one of the huge Black Panther villains of the Marvel universe, sympathetic in his own story was, that's not easy to do, I guess.
Well, I think that's the discipline of storytelling, right? Like it's, I've been very fortunate to have met a lot of actors, in my time. And, when you talk to them about like playing a character and all this, I had a conversation with a pretty notable actor. I don't want to drop names, but, he's played a lot of bad guys, a lot of crazy people. And I asked him, like, does it stick with you or is it hard? He's like, no, that's just kind of the job. The job is not to judge, is to create and not judge. And you have to trust the fiction to do what it does. Funny thing about Killmonger, I didn't want to do it at first.
Oh, really?
Because I was like, when Will Nevins reached out to me, and I was like, man, is this like just a tie-in? I don't know, man. I don't just want to do a thing because the movie made $1 billion and let's put more stuff on the shelf.
Right.
And Marvel assured me, like, no. You can tell the story you want to tell. And what I was really interested in was exploring the seduction and the price of revenge, and what it takes from you. And for me, Eric's story is a really tragic one because he's a character that cannot get past his own anger and takes all of these massive gifts that he has, but he can't separate it from the trauma of his upbringing, and he doesn't reach his potential because of it. And I thought there was an important, important's a big word, but I thought there was a useful fable in that. Because although one could read Eric in very specific cultural ways, I think there's also a universal quality to that feeling of, I was passed over. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, you guys got everything. I got nothing. And you think that you get to be the lauded ones, the heroic ones. But I'm going to show you that that's bankrupt. I think we all feel like that at some point. I think we're all frustrated with where power sits in the world and
sure, and
however we express that. I mean, the funniest thing to me, if you flip between MSNBC and Fox News, both networks think everyone else is out to get them.
The mainstream news, I'm not like mainstream news is evil like a lot of people are, but it's just two sides of the same coin.
Well, there's a universal feeling,
right,
that something is getting in the way of me being able to realize myself. And when you catch, again, like if you just look past the stuff and really get to what the emotion is, what the feelings are, then you see the opportunities for storytelling. And so because Killmonger was part of the zeitgeist, that moment, I thought, well, this could be a really interesting way to explore those ideas and take people on a journey with this guy. So maybe, they can reflect a little bit on their own lives and their own choices. And I mean, I was an angry kid growing up for a lot of reasons. And I had to work myself through that. And it got easier the more successful I got, honestly. But I still remember what it's like. And I still remember those moments in my life where I had a choice. You could either do what your anger tells you to do, or you could put that aside and you could build towards your future. And most of the time I did the latter, but a couple of times I did the former to my detriment, And that's, those are the kind of things that I would like to deal with, whether it's like Batman or Angel, Carnage, Killmonger, what have you. A lot of it is my experience kind of creeps into the fiction. And part of me is always writing to my 13-year-old self.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to write a book that, like, if I read it at 13, it would have made my day better.
Right. No, I totally get it. Yeah, I totally get that. Let me close on a couple of points, if you don't mind. I know you got to bounce. One, you mentioned they're basically, the two different news stations are basically saying the same thing. I spent some time in politics, and in fact, I've been elected twice. I'm not directly
amazing.
Yeah, I'm not directly involved anymore, but one of the things I've learned over the past, between just doing advocacy and campaigning and talking to people and paying attention, the two major political parties want the same thing. They just have different ways of trying to get to it. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. They'll say so-and-so's evil and so-and-so's evil. It's like, no, everybody's trying to work for the common good. Everybody's trying to work for this, but this side they think this is the way to get there. And the other side has that way to get there. When I was in politics, both sides agreed 80 to 90% of the time, but all the fighting is over on about 10% of the stuff. So, and even then they're trying to get to the same goal usually.
Yeah. Well, part of it, man, is we have entire economies based on conflict, right? I call it the conflict economy. Whether it's YouTube, large media sources, what have you, they make money when we're mad at each other,
right?
And they're exacerbating these things. But ultimately, life comes down to, how can we all work together? It's the neighbor. It's the person across the street, right? It's if someone needs a hand and I can give them that hand and I don't because they're wearing a red hat, then I'm a jerk. Yeah,
there's something there's something wrong there because
like we can't be like that. And I don't care like what side of the aisle you're on. Sure, I'm left of center, but that doesn't mean that I excuse behavior on the left. I don't like we have to find a way to work together because like you said, we agree on a good measure of things. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times what we're arguing about isn't result. We're arguing about method.
Right. Exactly. That's the thing. And, people lose sight of the fact that the motive or the goal is very similar,
What I'm hoping is, and I'm going to probably won't happen. What I'm hoping is this pandemic is because it's funny, like a pandemic reminds you that we're kind of all part of the same continuum, right? It tells you like, hey, you're all the same. So, maybe not demonize each other so much. And, I care about people. I'm very grateful for the life I've been able to live, the career I have. I mean, I grew up eating government cheese sandwiches growing up in a single parent home in St. Louis. And I've managed to achieve a lot of the things that I dreamed of achieving when I was a kid. But I still remember what it's like, to be frustrated and to feel outside of a thing and to feel like you're being left behind. And, I hope that we remember that, people are people. And if you really want to, I don't even want to say change someone's mind, but if you want to get someone to consider a different way of thinking, then it's much better to do that with empathy and compassion. Like that. I mean, I talked to people in the white supremacist movement when I was writing American Carnage. And the funny thing about it is, at first, all the armor was up because they didn't know. Are they being set up? Am I some Vice magazine guy that's going to make them look bad? Well, make them look accurate, I guess. But like something happens when two human beings are sitting across from each other, making eye contact, having a conversation. It is very hard to keep irrational hatred. Right? Like it reminds you of the soul, And when we would have these conversations, and at first it would be, you know, like all the bullet points and other stuff you would imagine. But then it got on to, well, my brother went to Iraq and he came back screwed up and he couldn't find a leg up. Or, you know, 4 plants closed in my town and no one can find a job. Or, you know, I'm feeling like it came back to trauma. Mm-hmm. And when I would talk, you know, and I would say, well, you know, I grew up like this, I grew up like that, I grew up like that. And then before you know it, I'm not saying I converted people. They're still in the movement. That wasn't my job. I wasn't trying to change people. But what happened was, you know, we both left those conversations knowing that we talked to another human being.
That's the thing, right? Yeah, other people are not extras in our movie. You know, like we talked about earlier. They're
for sure, man.
They're fully realized 3-dimensional people, just like you are.
And that's social media. Like, it's so easy for us to look at somebody's avatar and their @ handle and not remember that is a soul.
Right.
You're talking to someone with a soul. And even if they're being rude in the moment, that's no excuse to try to, like, you know, denigrate them even further. And, like, look, I can get irritated like anybody else. I'm sure if you comb through the many, many years of me being on social media, I've probably, you know, fell victim to hyperbole, you know, time and again. But I try, man. And that's all I ask of other people is, you know, try. We won't always look. None of us are Obi-Wan Kenobi, right?
Right. Right. Right.
But we can try if we just try.
Right.
Then,
just try.
No, then I think, you know, we'll be in a better place, man.
All right. Well, that's a great place to end on. I know you have to get going. The last thing I got to do, Bryan, is that we do the bad joke of the week on Shane Plays Geek Talk. So I have to inflict this on you, and okay. I hope it doesn't disrupt your creativity for the rest of the day. Why do bees have sticky hair?
I have to put on my Batman voice. Try to solve this riddle. Why do bees have sticky hair? Okay, I know the answer has something to do with honeycomb.
That's right. They use honeycombs.
Right.
Batman wins again.
Holy honeycomb, Batman!
The Riddler's like, drat you, Batman. So
you dastardly master of devious delegation.
All right, man. I'd love to keep talking, but I know you got to go.
I got to remind on my bad Adam West impression.
All right, man. Thank you so much.
All right, brother. We'll talk soon, man. You have a good day and you stay safe out there.
You too, man.
That dude you showed up with tonight works undercover for the DEA, pal. His name... But this is Miami, pal. Listen, pal. I am strictly business, pal. And for my eyes only, pal. Hey, hold on, pal. Mellow out, pal. You want to shut us down, pal. You win the honeymoon to Mexico on some game show, pal? 2-minute warning, pal. Yeah, well, he's my lowlife, pal. And we... My pal.
Oh, Jigga.
Thanks, pal. You got it. Thanks, pal. Right smack in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle, pal.
Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/ShanePlays.